girl was crying alone. Then Stallone knocked and said, "Can I sit with you?" Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The polished floors of the Northwood High gymnasium gleamed under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the overhead fluorescent lights. Each scuff mark and faded boundary line a testament to countless games won and lost, to the fleeting triumphs and bitter disappointments of youthful athletic endeavor. Today, however, the usual scent of sweat and old varnish was overpowered by the cloying sweetness of cheap air freshener and the faint, anxious aroma of teenage desperation. It was Spirit Week, a concept that Elias Thorne, a visiting storyteller and amateur historian, found both perplexing and faintly alarming. Banners, constructed with more enthusiasm and artistry, screamed aggressive encouragement in the school's colors of garish blue and gold. The bleachers, usually half empty, even for championship games, vibrated with the rhythmic stomping of hundreds of adolescent feet, a percussive accompaniment to the anemic efforts of a student DJ struggling to coax a party atmosphere from a pair of crackling speakers. Elias sat on a low, scarred wooden bench near the equipment room, a forgotten alcove that offered a sliver of relative quiet in the overwhelming sensory assault. He had been invited by Mrs. Albright, the school's earnest, well-meaning, and slightly overwhelmed head of the English department, to deliver a series of talks later in the week on the quiet narratives of courage. Looking around at the current spectacle of forced jollity and performative enthusiasm, he couldn't help but feel that his task was akin to trying to plant a delicate wildflower in the path of the stampeding herd. His worn tweed jacket, a relic from a gentler, more contemplative era, seemed to absorb the noise and reflect none of it, making him an island of anachronistic calm in a sea of restless energy. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, just before a storm, scanned the assembled students, not with judgment, but with the practiced, discerning gaze of a man who had spent a lifetime deciphering the subtle, often contradictory, narratives of human behavior. He saw the forced smiles, the carefully constructed masks of belonging, the underlying anxieties that thrummed beneath the surface of youthful bravado. His attention, however, was drawn not to the preening athletes practicing their choreographed victory dances, nor to the cheerleaders whose smiles seemed stretched a little too tight, their enthusiasm a little too shrill. Instead, he found himself observing a small knot of girls huddled near the entrance to the girls' locker room. They were ostensibly part of the larger, boisterous crowd, yet there was a subtle dissonance in their interactions, a furtive quality to their whispered conversation, an undercurrent of something that felt less like spirit and more like conspiracy. One girl in particular, her dark hair a cascade around a pale, heart-shaped face, seemed to be the focus of their hushed, intense discussion. Her shoulders were slumped, her gaze fixed on the worn linoleum floor, and she kept casting quick, anxious glances towards the closed locker room door, as if it held some unspoken dread. Elias, a man attuned to the silent language of sorrow, the subtle tremors of a spirit in distress, felt a familiar stirring of concern. He had seen that look before, in countless faces, in countless situations, the look of someone carrying a burden too heavy, too private to share. In his breast pocket, his fingers, calloused from years of working with old books and delicate artifacts, found the familiar, smooth contours of a small, intricately carved wooden whistle. It was shaped like a soaring bird, a knot-winger, a creature known for its resilience, its ability to sing its song even in the harshest of winds. It had been a gift from his late wife, Ilara, a woman whose own spirit had been as strong and as true as the bird it represented. She had believed in the power of a single, clear note to cut through the noise and confusion of the world, to signal hope, or warning, or simply a moment of quiet, empathetic presence. He watched as the small group of girls, their hushed conference concluded, began to disperse, their laughter a little too loud, a little too brittle, as they melted back into the larger, unseen crowd. The dark-haired girl, however, lingered for a moment, her isolation suddenly stark, palpable. She cast one last, hunted look towards the locker room door, Then, with a visible effort, squared her small shoulders and hurried away, rejoining the relentless, performative enthusiasm of the pep rally. But Elias had seen the flicker of raw pain in her eyes, the shadow of a sorrow that the school's forced spirit could not touch, could not erase. A little later, during a particularly cacophonous rendition of the school fight song by the struggling marching band, Elias noticed the locker room door creak open, just a fraction of an inch. No one emerged. The gym throbbed with noise, with movement, with the overwhelming, collective energy of hundreds of young lives. But from that small, shadowed opening, Elias heard it, a sound so faint, so fragile, that it was almost lost in the surrounding din. A soft choke sob, then another. The unmistakable sound of a heart breaking, or perhaps already broken. He looked around. Mrs. Albright was engrossed in a conversation with the school principal, her face a mask of professional concern. The coaches shouted instructions, their voices hoarse. The students, lost in their own worlds of social anxiety and fleeting hormonal surges, noticed nothing beyond their immediate sphere. The girl, whoever she was crying alone, her sorrow an invisible, unacknowledged island in a vast, indifferent ocean of manufactured cheer. Elias felt that familiar, insistent tug, the quiet ache of empathy that had so often guided his actions, his choices, his life. He was not a man to interfere, not one to thrust himself into the private grief of others. He preferred the role of observer, of quiet witness. But sometimes, he knew, observation was not enough. Sometimes, silence was not an act of respect, but of complicity. Sometimes, a gentle knock, a quiet question, was the only humane response to the unspoken, unseen suffering of another. He rose slowly from the worn wooden bench, the small, carved bird whistle a solid, reassuring weight in his hand. He moved towards the girls' locker room, his footsteps, clad in well-worn leather shoes, making almost no sound on the polished gymnasium floor. He wasn't sure what he would say, what he could possibly offer. He only knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he couldn't walk away, couldn't leave that solitary, heartbreaking sorrow unanswered. The raucous noise of the pep rally seemed to recede as he approached the closed door, the faint, almost inaudible sound of weeping growing a little clearer, a little more insistent, a fragile counterpoint to the gym's overwhelming, unthinking din. He stood before the door for a long, contemplative moment, a quiet figure of anachronistic concern in a world that often seemed too loud, too busy, too self-absorbed to notice the quiet casualties of its relentless, unforgiving pace. The decision to intervene, though contrary to his reserved nature, felt less like a choice and more like an imperative, a response to a silent call that only a heart attuned to sorrow could truly hear. Elias raised a hand, its skin weathered like old parchment, and tapped once, a single, gentle knock on the painted metal surface of the locker room door. It was not the demanding rap of authority, nor the impatient summons of annoyance. It was a quiet inquiry, a tentative offering of presence, a question posed in the universal language of respectful concern. The soft, choked sobbing from within, which had been a low, continuous lament, hitched abruptly, then ceased altogether. A profound silence emanated from behind the door, a silence far heavier, far more charged than the earlier sounds of grief. It was the silence of surprise, of fear, perhaps even of a desperate, fragile hope that someone, anyone, had heard. Elias waited, his own breathing quiet, measured. He knew that these moments, these delicate thresholds between private sorrow and potential connection, required an immense patience, an unwavering respect for the vulnerability of the one within. He didn't knock again. He simply stood there, a still, quiet figure, his presence a silent testament to his unwillingness to ignore the faint, heartbreaking signal of distress he had perceived. He could feel the thrum of the pep rally through the soles of his shoes, a distant, irrelevant vibration. His focus was entirely on the closed door, on the unseen grief it concealed. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a minute or two, the door creaked open, just a few inches, revealing a sliver of the dimly lit, utilitarian space within. And in that narrow opening, a pair of eyes, red-rimmed, swollen, and filled with a raw, unguarded pain, peered out at him. They belonged to the dark-haired girl he had seen earlier, the one whose anxiety had been a discordant note in the gym's symphony of forced cheer. Her name, he would later learn from a small, neatly lettered label on a nearby locker, was Maya. She stared at him, her expression a confused amalgam of surprise, apprehension, and a flicker of something else, something fragile and hesitant. Hope, perhaps, or simply the dazed uncertainty of someone interrupted in a moment of profound private sorrow. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, tremulous, barely audible above the distant throb of the marching band. Elias offered a faint, reassuring smile. "My name is Elias Thorne," he replied, his own voice low, calm, designed to soothe rather than alarm. "I'm a visitor here at the school. I was invited to speak to some of the English classes later this week." He paused, allowing her a moment to process his words. I thought I heard someone in distress," he continued gently, "and I just wanted to make sure to see if you were all right." Maya didn't answer immediately. Her eyes, filled with a pain that seemed far too large for her young frame, searched his, trying to discern his motives, to gauge the sincerity of his concern. Elias met her gaze steadily, without pity, without judgment, simply with a quiet, empathetic presence. He made no attempt to push the door open further, no effort to press her for an explanation. He simply waited, respecting her space, her vulnerability. I'm okay," she finally mumbled, though the tremor in her voice and the fresh tears that welled in her eyes eloquently belied her words. She made no move to open the door wider, nor to close it completely. She seemed caught in a state of agonizing indecision, trapped between the desire for solitude and the unspoken need for connection. "Sometimes," Elias said gently, his voice a soft counterpoint to the distant clamor of the pep rally, "being okay is the hardest thing in the world to be. Especially when you feel alone, when the weight of whatever troubles you seems too heavy to carry by yourself." He paused, then asked the question that had been forming in his mind, a question born not of idle curiosity, but of a genuine, heartfelt desire to understand, to offer some small measure of comfort, if he could. "Is there anything," he inquired, his tone imbued with a gentle sincerity, "anything at all, that a quiet old man with a bit of time on his hands might be able to do to make things even a little bit better for you right now?" The question hung in the air, simple, unassuming, yet profound in its implications. It was not an offer of easy solutions, nor a demand for explanation. It was simply an offer of help, unconditional, unjudging, extended with a quiet respect for her autonomy, her pain. He watched her closely, noting the slight furrow of her brow, the way her fingers tightened on the crumpled tissue she held. He knew this was a critical moment. Her response would determine whether the fragile bridge of potential connection would hold or collapse under the weight of her fear and distrust. Maya continued to peer at Elias through the narrow gap in the doorway, her eyes still searching his face, weighing his words, his intentions. The harsh fluorescent light from the gymnasium hallway spilled into the dimmer recesses of the locker room, illuminating the glistening tracks of tears on her pale cheeks, the slight, uncontrollable tremble of her lower lip. She clutched a sodden, crumpled tissue in one hand, her knuckles white with the force of her grip, a small, physical manifestation of the internal turmoil that consumed her. Why would you care?" she finally whispered, the words laced with a raw, painful cynicism that seemed achingly out of place in someone so young. It was the question of a heart that had perhaps known too much disappointment, too much indifference. "You don't even know me." Elias considered her question thoughtfully. It was a fair assessment, born of a world that often taught caution, distrust, especially towards the unsolicited kindness of strangers. "That's true, Maya," he said, his voice gentle, acknowledging the validity of her skepticism. He had subtly glanced at a nearby locker, its door adorned with a neatly lettered nameplate bearing her name, and had chosen to use it now, hoping it might create a small bridge of familiarity, of personal connection. I don't know you. Not personally. But, he continued, his gaze steady, empathetic, I believe I know something of what it feels like to carry a sorrow that seems too heavy to bear alone. I know what it feels like to believe that no one else could possibly understand or even care. He paused, allowing his words to settle, to resonate in the quiet space between them. And I also believe, Maya, he added, his tone imbued with a quiet conviction, that sometimes a listening ear, a moment of unjudging presence, can make a profound difference. Whether I know you or not, your distress is real. It is palpable. And that, in itself, is reason enough for another human being to care. His words, simple, direct, devoid of any platitude or patronizing sympathy, seemed to strike a chord within her. The suspicion in her eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of something else, a fragile, hesitant vulnerability, a yearning, perhaps, for just such an unconditional acceptance. She opened the door a fraction wider, though still not fully, her small frame partially shielded by its edge. It's stupid, she mumbled, her gaze dropping to the scuffed linoleum floor of the locker room. Just girl stuff. You wouldn't understand. An old man like you. Her voice trailed off, as if embarrassed by her own dismissal, or perhaps by the very idea of sharing her adolescent woes with someone so removed from her world. Perhaps not the specific details, Elias conceded gently. The particular circumstances of our individual sorrows are often unique, shaped by our own lives, our own experiences. But the feeling of being overwhelmed, Maya, of being hurt, of feeling like no one truly sees or understands, that is a universal language. It is a language that transcends age, gender, circumstance. And I believe, he added, his voice imbued with a quiet certainty, that I understand that language quite well. He paused, then continued, his tone thoughtful, reflective, and sometimes, Maya, the things that feel stupid or insignificant to us, especially when viewed through the lens of our own pain, are actually quite important. They're the things that shape us, that test our character, that reveal our vulnerabilities and our strengths. They are integral parts of our story. And every story, no matter how seemingly small or insignificant, deserves to be heard, to be acknowledged, without being dismissed or trivialized. Maya looked up at him again, a glimmer of something akin to trust, fragile, but undeniable, beginning to dawn in her tear-filled eyes. The carefully constructed walls she had erected around her pain, walls built of pride, of fear, of a desperate attempt to appear okay, were beginning to show the first, faint cracks. The pep rally outside, with its boisterous music and its shouted slogans, seemed a world away. Its manufactured enthusiasm a stark, almost cruel contrast to the raw, authentic human drama unfolding in the threshold of the girls' locker room. Elias remained patient, his gaze kind, his posture relaxed, non-threatening. He knew that trust, especially for someone so young and so clearly wounded, was a delicate seed, requiring gentle nurturing, fertile ground of unconditional acceptance before it could even begin to sprout. He wasn't there to force a confession or to offer easy solutions. He was simply there to listen, if and when she chose to speak. His hand, resting in his pocket, brushed against the cool, smooth wood of the bird whistle, a silent reminder of his wife's wisdom, her belief in the power of clear, true notes to cut through even the most jarring dissonance. Maya took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind that precedes either a fresh outburst of tears or a difficult confession. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the locker room door for a moment, as if gathering her strength. Elias waited, his silence an invitation, not a pressure. The distant thump of the school band provided a strange, almost surreal counterpoint to the intense, intimate stillness between them. They were talking about me, Maya finally said, her voice barely audible, muffled against the door. My friend. She spat the word out with a venom that spoke volumes about the depth of her betrayal. In here, earlier, they didn't know I was in the restroom stall. They thought I had gone home sick. She lifted her head, her eyes ablaze with a fresh wave of pain and anger. They said awful things. That I was annoying, clingy, that no one actually liked me, that they only hung out with me out of pity. Each word was a small, sharp stone flung from her lips, each one clearly echoing a deeper wound inflicted upon her spirit. And then they started laughing about how I looked. My hair, my clothes, like I was some kind of joke to them. She didn't elaborate further on the specifics of their cruelty, but the renewed welling of tears in her eyes, the way her small body trembled with suppressed sobs, painted a vivid enough picture. It was the classic, timeless tragedy of adolescent betrayal, a pain made all the more acute by the fact that it was inflicted by those she had considered her closest confidants, her trusted allies in the often treacherous landscape of high school social dynamics. Elias nodded slowly, his expression one of profound empathy. He didn't offer empty platitudes, didn't try to minimize her pain by saying it'll pass, or they didn't mean it. He simply acknowledged her hurt, validated its intensity. Words can be weapons, Maya, he said quietly, his voice imbued with a somber understanding. Sometimes, the unseen wounds they inflict are the deepest, the most difficult to heal, especially when they come from those we trust, those we believe care for us. He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, as if she hadn't expected such an unflinching acknowledgement of her pain from an older man, a stranger. Most adults, in her limited experience, tended to dismiss such matters as mere teenager drama, failing to recognize the profound impact such betrayals could have on a young, vulnerable psyche. What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity momentarily eclipsing her sorrow, her voice still thick with unshed tears. "I mean," Elias explained gently, choosing his words with care, "that a broken bone will eventually mend, a physical bruise will eventually fade. The body has remarkable powers of recuperation. But a wound to the spirit, Maya, a betrayal of trust, a word spoken in deliberate cruelty, those can leave scars that linger for a lifetime, if we allow them to fester, if we don't find a way to tend to them, to understand them, to ultimately transcend them." He held her gaze, his own filled with a quiet, unwavering belief in her innate capacity for resilience, even if she couldn't see it in herself at that moment. "But," he added, his voice gentle but firm, offering a flicker of hope in the midst of her despair, "they don't have to define us, Maya. We always have a choice in how we respond to those wounds. We can choose to let them make us bitter, distrustful, closed off from the world. Or we can choose to let them make us stronger, wiser, more compassionate towards the suffering of others, because we ourselves have known pain." The pep rally outside, with its booming music and its shouted slogans, seemed a million miles away, its manufactured enthusiasm a stark, almost grotesque contrast to the raw, authentic human drama unfolding in the threshold of the girls' locker room. Elias wasn't offering easy answers, no quick fixes to her shattered heart. He was offering something far more valuable: perspective, understanding, and the unwavering belief in her own capacity to not just survive this pain, but to ultimately grow from it. His quiet presence, his refusal to judge or dismiss, was a lifeline in the turbulent sea of her adolescent grief. He sensed she was on the verge of either retreating further into her sorrow or taking a tentative step towards sharing more of her burden. The choice was hers, and he would respect it, whatever it might be. Maya absorbed Elias's words, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. The raw, immediate sting of her friend's betrayal still throbbed acutely, but his quiet, empathetic presence, his refusal to dismiss or trivialize her feelings, seemed to be creating a small, protected space for reflection amidst the maelstrom of her emotions. "Stronger?" she repeated, her voice still tinged with skepticism, the concept clearly alien to her current state of mind. "How can something like this awful feeling, possibly make you stronger? It just makes you want to hide, to build walls around yourself, to never trust anyone ever again. Her words were a cry of pain, a testament to the shattering impact of the betrayal on her young, vulnerable heart. That is a very natural first reaction, Maya, Elias acknowledged softly. When we are wounded, especially by those we held close, our instinct is indeed to retreat, to shield ourselves from the possibility of further hurt. And sometimes, he conceded, a period of quiet withdrawal, of tending to our wounds in solitude, is necessary, even healthy. It allows us time to process, to grieve, to begin to understand what has happened. He paused, allowing her to absorb this validation of her immediate impulses. But true strength, Maya, the kind of strength that endures, that allows us to continue to live a full and meaningful life, is not found in building impenetrable walls around our hearts. Such walls may keep out further pain, it is true, but they also keep out joy, connection, love. And a life lived behind such barriers can become a very lonely, very barren existence. He saw her flinch slightly at his words, as if recognizing a truth she hadn't yet dared to articulate. Enduring strength, Elias continued, his voice gentle but firm, is found in learning to open the door again, however cautiously, when the time is right. It's found in the courage to risk vulnerability once more, armed now with the wisdom gained from our past hurts. It's found in choosing empathy over bitterness, understanding over resentment, hope over despair. He paused again, then asked softly, "These friends who hurt you so deeply today, Maya, have they always been unkind? Or is this behavior something new, something unexpected, something that perhaps surprised you as much as it pained you?" Maya hesitated, her brow creasing in thought. Then, reluctantly, she shook her head slowly. "No," she admitted, her voice low, almost inaudible. "Not always. We used to be really close. We used to share everything, laugh together. That's why this hurts so much. It feels like they aren't even the same people anymore." Then perhaps, Elias suggested gently, offering a different lens through which to view the situation. Their words today, however cruel they may have sounded, were not a true reflection of who they are at their core, or indeed, of who you are. Perhaps they were spoken out of their own insecurities, their own fears, their own momentary lapses in judgment or compassion. "Sometimes, Maya," he added, his voice imbued with a lifetime of observing human frailty, people who are hurting themselves or who are feeling small and insignificant, lash out and try to make others feel small as well. It doesn't make their actions right, not for a moment. But understanding the possible source of their unkindness can sometimes lessen its sting, can help us not to internalize it so deeply. Maya looked thoughtful, her tears momentarily forgotten as she grappled with this new perspective. I never thought of it that way before," she confessed, a flicker of surprise in her voice. "It is a difficult thing to see clearly when you are in the midst of such intense pain," Elias acknowledged with a nod. "Our own hurt can often blind us to the complexities of others' motivations. But sometimes, taking a step back, trying to see the bigger picture, can offer a measure of clarity, a path towards understanding, if not immediate forgiveness." He then did something that seemed both unexpected and entirely natural. He reached slowly into his worn tweed jacket pocket and took out the small, intricately carved wooden bird whistle. He held it out to her, resting gently on the palm of his weathered hand. The simple object, imbued with his late wife's spirit and wisdom, seemed to radiate a quiet warmth, a silent offering of comfort and hope in the sterile, unforgiving environment of the locker room hallway. Maya looked at the small wooden whistle nestled in Elias's palm, its smooth, hand-worn surface gleaming faintly in the dim light filtering from the hallway. It was shaped like a bird in mid-flight, its wings swept back, its form both delicate and surprisingly resilient. She didn't reach for it immediately, but her gaze was drawn to it, a flicker of childlike curiosity momentarily eclipsing the rawness of her grief. "This was a gift," Elias said softly, his voice imbued with a gentle reverence, from someone very wise, someone who understood the often hidden melodies of the human heart. He paused, allowing Maya a moment to absorb the quiet significance of his words. She told me it was a reminder, he continued, that even in the midst of great noise and confusion, even when the world seems filled with discordant notes and harsh cacophonies, it is always important to listen for the clear, true notes. The true notes of our own heart. Maya. And perhaps, if we listen carefully enough, the true notes that may still reside in others, even when they are temporarily drowned out by their own fear, or their own pain, or their own momentary lapses into unkindness. What does that mean exactly? Maya asked, her voice still a little shaky, but tinged now with a genuine interest that seemed to pull her slightly out of the depths of her immediate sorrow. It means, Maya, Elias explained gently, his eyes meeting hers with a steady compassion, that even when people say hurtful things, even when they disappoint us profoundly, it is important to try to listen for the truth of who they are beyond that momentary cruelty. Are they truly defined by that unkindness? Or is there something else within them, something better, that has simply been obscured, lost for a time? He paused again, allowing her to ponder this. And perhaps even more importantly, he continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. It means listening to the truth of who you are, Maya. It means not allowing their unkind words, their thoughtless judgments, to define your worth, to silence your own song. You have your own clear, true note within you, Maya. Don't let anyone else's dissonance drown it out. He saw a glimmer of understanding dawn in her eyes, a flicker of recognition that transcended her immediate pain. The tears still flowed, yes, but the utter desolation that had consumed her earlier seemed to be receding, replaced by a fragile, hesitant thoughtfulness. The pep rally outside, with its relentless assault on the senses, its manufactured enthusiasm, seemed increasingly distant, almost irrelevant backdrop to the profound, healing stillness that had settled between the old man and the young girl in the doorway of the girl's locker room. A connection had been forged, not through shared experiences or common backgrounds, but through the simple, universal language of empathy, of shared humanity. Elias wasn't offering easy answers, no glib reassurances that everything would magically be all right. He was offering something far more substantial, a different way of framing her pain, a path towards resilience, toward a strength that was not about invulnerability, but about the quiet courage to feel, to heal, and ultimately, to reclaim her own voice, her own truth. He saw her gaze return to the small wooden whistle in his hand, as if it held some tangible key to the wisdom he was imparting. The air between them was still heavy with her unspoken grief, but it was no longer suffocating. A small window had been opened, letting in a sliver of light, a breath of fresh air, a possibility of a different perspective. The simple act of his presence, his willingness to listen without judgment, had created a sanctuary where her pain could be acknowledged and perhaps begin to transform. Maya reached out a tentative finger and gently touched the wooden bird whistle. Its smooth, cool surface seemed to offer a small, tangible comfort. "So," she said, her voice still a little shaky, "you're saying I shouldn't just hate them?" Elias smiled faintly. "Hate is a heavy burden to carry, Maya. It often ends up poisoning the carrier more than the one it's directed at. Understanding, empathy, even a degree of forgiveness, if and when you're ready, those are much lighter and ultimately much more empowering paths." He paused, then added, "That doesn't mean you have to forget what happened or pretend it didn't hurt. It simply means you choose not to let their actions dictate your own peace of mind, your own sense of self-worth." He saw her considering his words, turning them over in her mind. The concept was clearly new to her, a stark contrast to the raw, immediate impulse for anger and retribution that often follows such a betrayal. "But what if they don't deserve to be understood?" she asked, a flicker of her earlier pain returning. "What if they're just mean? Perhaps they are, Maya," Elias conceded. "Or perhaps they're simply lost, confused, struggling with their own invisible battles. We can never truly know what goes on in another person's heart. but we can choose how we respond to their actions. We can choose to meet cruelty with more cruelty, or we can choose to meet it with a quiet strength, a steadfast commitment to our own values of kindness and integrity. He saw a new thought dawning in her eyes. So, it's not about them, she said slowly. It's about me? About how I want to be? Elias nodded. Precisely, Maya. You cannot control their actions, their words, but you can always control your own. You can choose to be defined by their unkindness, or you can choose to rise above it, to define yourself by your own capacity for compassion, for resilience, for grace. He looked at her with a quiet, unwavering belief. And from what I've seen of you in these few short minutes, Maya, he said, I believe you have a great capacity for all of those things. A small, watery smile touched Maya's lips. It was the first genuine smile Elias had seen from her. It was fragile, hesitant, but it was there. You really think so? She asked, a note of wonder in her voice. I do, Elias affirmed. The fact that you're feeling this pain so deeply, Maya, tells me that you have a good heart. A heart that values friendship, loyalty, kindness. Those are precious qualities. Don't let anyone or any experience take those away from you. He gently closed his hand over the bird whistle, then offered it to her. Perhaps, he said, you'd like to hold on to this for a while. As a reminder, to listen for those clear, true notes, within yourself and in the world around you. Maya hesitated for a moment, then slowly, carefully took the whistle from his hand. Her fingers closed around its smooth, comforting shape. She looked at it, then up at Elias, her eyes still tear-filled, but now holding a new light, a flicker of hope, of a dawning strength she hadn't known she possessed. The noise from the pep rally seemed to recede further, the empty clamor of the crowd a stark contrast to the profound, healing stillness that had settled between the old man and the young girl in the doorway of the locker room. A connection had been forged, a bridge built across the chasm of age and experience, all through the simple act of listening, of understanding, of offering a quiet, unwavering belief in the enduring power of the human spirit. This small exchange, unscripted and heartfelt, felt more real, more significant than any of the manufactured excitement happening just a few feet away. Maya held the wooden bird whistle in her palm, its smooth, handcrafted surface a small point of solidity in the turmoil of her emotions. She turned it over, examining its delicate, soaring shape. It's beautiful, she whispered, her voice still a little hoarse. My wife carved it, Elias said, a faint, melancholy smile touching his lips. She had a gift for finding the beauty in simple things, for seeing the potential for grace even in the most ordinary of materials. Much like people, I suppose. Maya looked up at him, her eyes searching his. She sounds like she was a very special person. She was, Elias affirmed, his voice soft with remembrance. She taught me a great deal about listening, Maya. Not just with my ears, but with my heart. She taught me that everyone has a story. Everyone carries burdens. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their flaws or their mistakes. He paused, then continued. And she taught me that true strength isn't about avoiding pain or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about facing it, learning from it, and ultimately finding a way to transform it into something meaningful, into wisdom, into compassion. Maya listened intently, her gaze fixed on his face. The raw immediacy of her own sorrow seemed to be softening, receding slightly, as if eclipsed by the larger, more profound truths Elias was sharing. So, she said slowly, even though my friends hurt me, I can still choose to be okay, not because of them, but because of me. Precisely, Elias confirmed. Their actions are a reflection of who they are, Maya. Your response is a reflection of who you are, and who you choose to become. He saw a new resolve dawning in her eyes, a flicker of the resilience he had sensed within her from the start. The tears had not stopped entirely, but they were no longer the tears of utter desolation. They were, perhaps, the tears of a healing process beginning, of a burden shared, of a path forward glimpsed, however faintly. "It won't be easy, Maya," Elias cautioned gently. "Healing takes time, and trust, once broken, is a difficult thing to rebuild. But it is possible, and it starts with choosing to believe in your own worth, your own strength, your own capacity for grace." He smiled at her, a genuine, encouraging smile. "And from what I've witnessed here today," he said, "I have no doubt that you possess all of those qualities in abundance." Maya clutched the bird whistle a little tighter. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but this time it was accompanied by a small, hesitant, but undeniably hopeful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she whispered. "Thank you for listening, and for understanding." "It was my privilege, Maya," Elias replied. He knew this was just a beginning for her, a single step on a long and difficult journey. But he also knew that every journey, no matter how arduous, begins with such a step. And he had faith in her ability to navigate it, armed with her own innate strength, and perhaps with a quiet reminder of a small, soaring wooden bird. The cacophony of the pep rally still echoed from the gym, but here, in this unexpected sanctuary, a different kind of spirit had been ignited. The quiet, unbreakable spirit of a young heart beginning to heal, nurtured by the unexpected kindness of a stranger who understood the language of sorrow and the enduring melody of hope. As Maya stood in the doorway, the small wooden bird whistle nestled in her palm. A newfound composure seemed to settle over her. The hiccups of her earlier sobs had subsided, and though her eyes were still red and swollen, the look of utter desolation had been replaced by a fragile, tentative resolve. I should probably go back out there," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "They'll be wondering where I am." Elias nodded. "If you feel ready, Maya. But remember, you don't owe anyone a performance. You don't have to pretend to be okay if you're not. It's all right to still feel hurt. It's all right to take your time." Maya looked at him, a flicker of her earlier uncertainty returning. "But what do I say to them? To the girls who—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "Perhaps, for now, you don't need to say anything at all, Maya," Elias suggested gently. "Perhaps your quiet dignity, your refusal to be drawn into their drama or to stoop to their level of unkindness, will be the most powerful statement you can make." He paused, then added, "And if and when you do choose to speak, let your words come from a place of truth, of self-respect, not from a place of anger or a desire for retaliation. Remember those clear, true notes we talked about." Maya nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "So, I just be myself. That," Elias said with a warm smile, "is often the bravest and most difficult thing any of us can strive to be. And you, Maya, have a self-worth being." He saw a flicker of a genuine, unforced smile touch her lips again. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice filled with a sincere gratitude that warmed Elias's heart. "For everything." "You're very welcome, Maya," he replied. "Remember, you're stronger than you think, and you are not alone." With a final, small nod, Maya straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and turned away from the locker room door. She didn't immediately rejoin the boisterous pep rally. Instead, she walked slowly toward a quieter section of the bleachers, her gaze thoughtful, her hand still clutching the small bird whistle. Elias watched her go, a sense of quiet hope settling over him. He had offered what little comfort and guidance he could. The rest was up to Maya. But he had faith in her innate resilience, in her capacity to navigate this painful experience and emerge from it wiser, stronger, and perhaps even more compassionate. He turned away from the locker room, the faint echoes of Maya's earlier sorrow replaced by a sense of a fragile peace achieved. He knew that the world was full of such hidden hurts, of unseen battles fought in the quiet corners of young hearts. And he was grateful that, just this once, he had been in the right place at the right time to offer a moment of connection, a whisper of hope, a reminder of the enduring power of a single clear, true note. The pep rally thundered on, but for Elias, the true spirit of the day resided not in the loud cheers or the garish banners, but in the quiet courage of a young girl beginning to find her own song again. His own part in her story was small, a brief intersection of paths, yet he felt the profound satisfaction that comes from having made a genuine, human connection, from having perhaps helped to steer a young life, however slightly, toward a more hopeful horizon. Elias made his way back to the bench near the equipment room, the cacophony of the pep rally washing over him once more. But it sounded different to him now, its boisterous energy less oppressive, perhaps even tinged with a faint note of hope. He saw Maya sitting alone on the bleachers, not isolated but simply separate. She wasn't crying anymore. She was watching the proceedings with a thoughtful, almost detached expression. Occasionally, her fingers would trace the outline of the small bird whistle she still held in her hand. He saw the group of girls who had earlier caused her such distress. They glanced towards Maya several times, their expressions a mixture of guilt, curiosity, and perhaps a dawning unease. Maya didn't meet their gaze. She didn't offer anger, nor seek reconciliation. She simply maintained her quiet dignity, her self-possession a silent rebuke to their earlier cruelty. Elias knew that Maya's journey was far from over. The wounds of betrayal would take time to heal. Trust, once shattered, would need to be cautiously rebuilt, or perhaps new, more authentic connections sought. But he also knew that something important had shifted within her today. She had found a spark of her own inner strength, a glimmer of her own resilience. She had learned that her worth was not dependent on the opinions or actions of others. And she had discovered that even in the midst of pain, there could be moments of unexpected grace, of human connection, that offered a path forward. Elias thought of his late wife, and the wisdom she had so freely shared. She would have liked Maya, he mused. She would have recognized the strength and sensitivity in the young girl's heart, and she would have approved of the simple, quiet way in which Elias had offered his support. Later that week, when Elias gave his scheduled talk to the English classes, he spoke not just of the unsung heroes of history, but of the everyday courage required to navigate the often treacherous waters of human relationships. He spoke of empathy, of resilience, of the importance of listening for those clear, true notes within oneself and others. He didn't mention Maya by name, of course, but as he spoke, his gaze drifted towards her where she sat in the audience, listening intently. He saw her fingers trace the outline of something small in her pocket, the wooden bird whistle, he surmised, and a faint, knowing smile touched her lips. In that moment, Elias knew that his visit to Northwood High had been about more than just a storytelling engagement. It had been about connecting with a young soul at a critical juncture, about offering a moment of quiet guidance, about passing on a small piece of accumulated wisdom. And sometimes, he reflected, those were the most important stories of all. The ones that didn't end with a flourish, but continued to resonate quietly and profoundly in the hearts of those they touched. The experience reaffirmed his belief in the power of simple human connection, the kind that asks for nothing in return but offers a steadying hand in a turbulent world. The pep rally eventually subsided, its frenetic energy dissipating like morning mist. The students drifted off to their next classes, their chatter filling the hallways. Elias remained on his bench for a while longer, observing the aftermath, the quiet return to normalcy. He saw Maya leave the bleachers, walking with a new, subtle confidence in her step. She didn't look defeated anymore, nor aggressively defiant. She simply looked centered. As she passed the locker room door, she paused for a fraction of a second, her gaze thoughtful, then continued on her way. It was a small moment, easily overlooked, but to Elias, it spoke volumes. It suggested a nascent understanding, a willingness to face her pain without being consumed by it. He knew that true healing was a process, not an event. But Maya had taken the first, crucial steps. The wooden bird whistle, now hers to keep, would serve as a tangible reminder of this day, of this encounter, of the strength she had discovered within herself. It would be a talisman against future hurts, a symbol of her own resilience, her own capacity for grace. Elias rose and made his way out of the gym, the scent of popcorn and sweaty socks fading behind him. He felt a quiet sense of gratitude, not for any accolades or thanks, but for the privilege of having witnessed a small moment of human transformation, of having played a minor role in helping a young heart find its way back to hope. His visit to Northwood High had been about more than just sharing stories from the past. It had been about participating, however quietly, in the ongoing, ever-unfolding story of the human spirit. And that, Elias knew, was a story worth telling again and again. The bird whistle, though no longer in his possession, continued to resonate within him. Its clear, true note a constant reminder of the enduring power of empathy, understanding, and the quiet courage to reach out to another soul in need. He hoped Maya would find her own ways to pass on that simple, profound melody. He had a feeling she would. The world needed more such clear, true notes to counter its often jarring dissonances.